Well, you see my little doggy in the back. His name is Buddha. I named him Buddha because he's so passive. Sweet little thing. He's a rescue. Derek and my daughter Tish brought that little doggy to me, and they took him to the groomers. He had tar and just was matted with tar and mud, and he just was a mess. Anyhow, my daughter took him to the groomers. They worked on him all day, and so here we are. And he is my constant companion. He does not leave me. I mean, that dog is so connected to me, it's not even funny. And he's a precious little thing. He thinks he's in doggy heaven because he gets a lot of attention, good attention, and he gets fed good. Of course, I bathe him, and he doesn't like that, but he sure likes the way that he's feeling after I get done with him. And he's really filled out. In fact, my daughter says, "Mom, you're feeding him too much," because he was so skinny. He was nothing but skin and bone when I got him. I've only had him maybe like 3 months, but he's a precious little thing. But anyhow, so many have asked me about my life, and yeah, there's a part of everybody's life, like I said before, that everybody's got a story. It has gone through hardships. I don't care how rich you are. I don't care what part of the country or what country and what state you're from. You're simply going to go through some difficult times. But it teaches us. I was born October 21st, 1941 in Connersville, Indiana. My mother was 13. Believe it or not, my dad was 17. And of course, back in Kentucky in that day and age, you were an old maid if you got to 14, But my mother, she almost grew up with me, In fact, I had a sister that followed. She was born in 1943. And then there was my brother Jack, and then my brother John was the last of the four. But there was the four of us. My father is the one that delivered me on the dining room table of my grandmother's house, which was just right outside of Connersville, Indiana. And he tied my umbilical cord, and when the doctor came, the doctor was drunk, and he put on my birth certificate October 20th. It was actually the 20th or the 21st. Excuse me. I hope I don't have to shut this down and start it over again. But anyhow, so my birth certificate says the 20th, but it was actually the 21st. And I have to tell everybody that story. But anyhow, as a child, I was very small, very thin. My mother, having 4 kids, was very difficult for her because I seemed to be the healthy one of the 4. I think that's because I was the first one. And she was sick. My mother was in and out of the hospital. She spent most of my childhood in the hospital, which in a small town of Connersville, Indiana, my school was literally right directly across the street from the Connersville Memorial Hospital at that time. I haven't been back there in such a long time, so I'm not quite sure. But we lived in this duplex. My uncle and my aunt, they lived right next door to the other side of this duplex. We only had 2 rooms, and I cooked on a potbelly stove. I remember going down to Mr. Whitaker's store down at the corner, buying a pound of bacon for 10 cents, coming back and putting that bacon on top of the potbelly stove. Us kids slept on a rollaway bed in the kitchen next to that potbelly stove. My mom and dad had their bed in the living room, and it, like I said, it was just two rooms. It was an outside toilet. It was the we had a pump, a spigot of water in the kitchen, and we never would go down to the basement because it was nothing but rats. We were scared to death of those rats. Anyhow, it was an old black house. You couldn't miss it because it was just worn, just weather worn, black. And I went to school at that time to the first and second grade was Mrs. Williams and Mrs. Hood. And I remember Mrs. Hood, she would ask us what we had for breakfast every morning. And when I said gravy and biscuits, she says, "That's not a proper breakfast." Well, my mother was so mad. She went to school and told her. She said, "You talk to my kid like that again." She said, "You're going to have a big problem with me." My mother was, very strong. And in fact, I ended up just like her. She was only 5'2". I'm only 5 foot. I won't tell you how much I weigh. I used to be a little thing, but not anymore. But anyhow, it was a good thing that we had Mama on our side because she constantly fought for us, And I remember being beaten up so bad when I was about 8 years old, going to school, and I came home crying. And I remember my dad said, he said, "You don't ever come home crying." I said, "But Dad, she was a girl that was far bigger than I was." And I said, "Not only was she big, but this girl was like, way taller than I was, outweighed me." He said, "I don't care." He said, "You pick up something and make her your size. Don't you ever come home again crying that somebody beat you up." And when I say tiny, I mean tiny. When I got pregnant at 18, I weighed 87 pounds soaking wet. You can't believe that today, but it's true. And that was 1962. So anyhow, getting back to my childhood, I could draw really well. I could sing really well because my father was constantly making my sister and I practice, because my uncle, he was not my uncle in blood, but he was raised with my father, and we called him Uncle String Beans. He used to be on Hee Haw. His name was David Aikman. His wife was Estelle. And we were extremely close, very close, until they were murdered in 1973. Just about killed our family because we were so close. He had been on the Grand Ole Opry for 34 years. My sister and I, we were singing professionally when we were teens. And we used to travel with him and appear with him. We did quite a bit of touring with him. And it was a good time because he was such an incredible man, funny man. Oh, my God. You could just look at him and just laugh your buns off. He just was something else. Precious guy. Didn't have a mean bone in his body. And down to earth. Oh, my God. He was so down to earth. And he lived right across the road from Grandpa Jones. They were fishing buddies, him and Ray Price. And that was old classic country, But anyhow, getting back to my childhood, during my childhood, my father, we stole my brother out of the hospital, James Wickham Riley Hospital in Indianapolis. My brother had leukemia, and he had every bit of blood taken out of his body and replaced. He had more blood transfusions than anyone I ever knew of. And he was so tiny that we had him in a dresser drawer. And one time, during my childhood, we came to Wickenburg, Arizona, and there was an old Indian chief that told my mother and father uh, that they needed to give him raw liver, baby calf's liver, and grind it up, and that and egg yolks, and that's what we were to give him and feed him, and we did that. And somehow or other, the Lord God healed him. And this was, oh gosh, back in the early 40s. And that was our first miracle. That was very much our first miracle. And my brother is still alive. And but he couldn't get back. He couldn't get into the military. He tried so hard. My brother John served in the Marines, but my brother Jack couldn't because they said, there's something strange with your blood. And my brother is still alive today, works at Disneyland, as an electrician, and he's a wonderful brother. I love him to pieces, and we talk quite often. But anyhow, we stayed in Connersville, Indiana. We stayed there probably till I was almost 12. In fact, we were coming up on my 12th birthday, and we had literally stayed a little while in Portland, Oregon, because my uncle was up there, my mother's brother, and then of course we stayed a little while in Wickenburg, but we ended up coming back to Connersville, Indiana, and that was when I was a baby. So my father decided to come to Southern California. Had heard this was the land of opportunity. And of course, they made the old Duesenberg and the Cord. They built those in Connersville, Indiana. And so there was a lot of work there when I was a kid, but it was tapering off quite a bit. So my father wanted a better life. So he and my mother had built this home up on 30th Street in Connersville. And a fireman had bought it, him and his wife. And I remember with the acreage and everything, it was $30,000. My father put that in the rim of his cap and told us kids, we don't have much money. So I, being the oldest of four, a little mama, they called me, I told the kids, we're just going to eat donuts. They're super cheap. So we're just going to eat donuts. And all the way to California, we kept asking for donuts. Finally, my mother said, honey, why are you kids eating donuts? I said, Mom, it's the cheapest thing. And Dad said we didn't have any money. And she said, oh, my goodness, honey. She said, I can't even tell you. She said, we got lots of money. She said, Papa just didn't want anyone to know about it, traveling on the road. And I remember, oh, well, we can eat. Good. So I think we finally had our first really good meal. But my father was he was a man that had a mother that really didn't care for him, except for what she could get out of him. They think families are dysfunctional now. Let me tell you, no family was as more dysfunctional as mine was. Let me tell you. Oh, my goodness gracious. I could write a book that you wouldn't even believe. It was horrible. But my father, his father was just traveling all over. He constantly was bragging. He did a little bit of everything. He rode with Jesse James. He rode with Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Riders. He had quite a life. He discovered a part of Alaska. I'm trying to think what part, but he discovered that. He was quite an accomplished, Rough Rider. Big, both of my grandfathers were well over 6 foot, and both of my grandmothers were both under 5 foot. I'm only 5 foot, and I was actually taller than either one of my grandmothers. And I came from a family of long lifers. I had great aunts that lived way into their hundreds, and they smoked corncob pipes and whittled on the front rocker, and if you if you had a washing machine, you put it on the front porch so everybody would know that when they passed you that you had a washing machine, because that was that was that was so that was something to be proud of, was having that washing machine on the front porch. But my father, he passed in 2006. My mother passed December 27th, 1978. My mother and I were very close. My father, he was a very vicious, mean-spirited man. He was not a good man except to total strangers. He treated total strangers far better than he did his kids and his wife. And he started molesting me at a very early age, my sister and myself. And I took the brunt of it. I tell you, it was the hardest time of my life. And I can't even tell you all that we went through trying to wrap ourselves, up in our sheets at night so tightly that, you couldn't get your finger down between me and the sheet. That's how tight we would wrap ourselves up, just so he wouldn't touch us. And I went through that for 10 years. And I mean 10 years. And he would threaten us every day, or threaten us all the time. You tell anybody, he says, your whole family, you will be the one to make sure that everybody in this family starves, because, I won't be around to take care of you. That's the only thing good I could say about my father, was that he was a good provider. Great to everybody else. I mean, everybody else loved him. Absolutely loved him. Thought he was just awesome. And of course, I have to say that as a child, he drove very fast, as I do, but he drove really fast and just was a daredevil. And I remember praying to God, please let the highway patrolman come at our door and tell us that my dad was killed on the highway. I used to pray for that. I really did. And that's how badly I just hated him. But, he was such a strong-willed, vicious man that you couldn't help but he made sure that we were disciplined. We never were allowed to say no. I don't want to, I don't have to. Those words would never come out of our mouth because the blood would be running down our legs. But we just knew. We knew by the look. And as a matter of fact, I ended up being a very, very disciplined parent, because I was a single mom to 3 kids. So I disciplined them, but I loved them. Like my dad wasn't. If he loved us, it led to molestation. So that was a little hard to take. But I was very close to my mom. I had a wonderful mom. She was amazing. She had, and I think the reason she stayed with my father is because she had abandonment issues really bad, because she came home at the age of 8 years old. And her parents had up and moved, and she didn't have any idea where they were. So she was abandoned at 8 years old, and she went to live with her best friend and their parents from 8 until 13 when she got married to my dad. And and that was Berdina Sparks. So that's how I have the name Berdina. Berdina Sparks was my mom's best friend, and that's who my mother named me after. So getting back to my father worked at the Roots Blower Company. He worked several companies in Connersville. And when the time came that we loaded up and came to California, I was, like I said, I was 12 years old. I just turned 12. It was October, the month of October. And we had everything we owned. And we came to California, and we stayed in a trailer in Pico Rivera, and stayed there for a couple of weeks until we bought this home in Whittier, right off of Gunn, right on Cornish Crest. And I even remember the address, 13737 Cornish Crest Road. And so that was in Whittier. And it was brand new home. And I remember the price was $9,995. And I remember my dad literally taking that cash out of the rim of his pocket, and he gave him cash. He paid cash for that house. Now that's amazing. But we lived there for a year until we bought some property in Riverside, and I think it was something like $70 an acre in Riverside, out by the orange groves, just outside, which is now called Woodcrest, just outside of Riverside. And we got this old house that was moved up there, and we built that, and then we built another newer home on the property next door. And I think we had something like I think it was something like 7 acres, but it was outside of Riverside. And if there was a school bus that was not that didn't go in your area, and you were more than 7 miles outside of Riverside, you could get a license at the age of 13 at that time. Now, mind you, this is in the 50s, and I got a license at 13 because I learned how to drive a Model T Ford when I was 8 years old. And my dad used to take oranges down to Florida and pick up furniture on the way back. And he'd put me in that seat with extenders on the pedals. And I was driving big trucks at the age of 8. This is when we lived in Connersville, Indiana. But getting back to Southern California, we ended up in Riverside, and the molestation, continued on. It was a very, very hard time for me, very hard time. But like I said, I ended up being the little mother and father because my dad was never home. He was always out womanizing and always out bragging about himself. He could brag about himself more than anyone I knew. And and it was because of his childhood, I'm sure. But we had a pretty good life. I mean, my dad was a good provider, like I said, and we had a nice home, and we weren't poor like we were when I was a child, but we got better and better. And my sister and I were traveling with my dad all over, singing country and Western music, and we were on several of the old time shows back in the 50s, which was Town Hall Party. My sister and I followed Jerry Lee Lewis on stage one time, and he was completely out of it, and we had to follow him. And he started undressing right in the middle of his song, so the whole stage went black. And we ended up being put on the stage in a dark black stage, and it was funny, but. But we lived through that time. Tex Ritter, who was John Ritter's dad, he's the one that got us on that stage. And he was a wonderful man, sweet man, sweet spirit. You couldn't help but love him. And he was in the old Westerns, there's old Westerns out there of Tex Ritter. And Jay Stewart was the MC. He was the MC Monty Hall's Let's Make a Deal. But he was the MC on Town Hall Party. Then there was Cliffy Stone's Hometown Jamboree. We were on that. That was Molly B and a lot of other stars, old country Western stars. And that was back in the 50s, and we so enjoyed it. And of course, my father, he just drove us like I can't even tell you. We had to sing. We had to practice every day. And I remember my sister and I, we'd come home, and we lived not a mile, but a half a mile off the road off of Van Buren, up on top of the hill. In fact, the drive there is still named after our last name, Suttles Drive. It's still there, and the old two houses are still there. But but anyhow, we had my sister and I. We were so excited because we'd start because there was nobody else up there, so we'd start taking off our clothes, running all the way that half mile up to the house. By the time we got in, we'd put on our old clothes, and we would dance to Dick Clark, American Bandstand. And those were the good days. My sister and I were extremely close. I was close with all of my siblings. We were always close because we were so disciplined by our father. All he had to do was look at us, or, I'll beat you till the blood runs down your legs. If I ever hear you lie, steal, cheat, he said, you won't even be able to walk. And it ended up that he did all those things, and us kids never did. We were really, really good kids. Never got in any trouble whatsoever. None of us ever smoked, drank, did drugs. I mean, we were good kids because we were scared to death of the men. I mean, scared to death. But finally, there was, we sang with the Country Boys, which Clarence White, who was a big, huge star when he got in with the Byrds. He was the main guitarist for the Byrds. And if you look up Clarence White, he was one of the best guitarists that there was. And his guitars today are very, very expensive and very well known. And in fact, Marty Stewart has a video on YouTube talking about Clarence White. And he was just, I think he was 14 when he played behind my sister and I. They were backups. They were also on the Andy Griffith Show at one time. And so we had a band, and we traveled, and we did all kinds of venues. And it took us out of our being so shy and quiet, that if in fact, I could sing better in front of a crowd than I could one-to-one, but we had big voices as children. And of course we toured with Uncle String Beans and Grandpa Jones. So those were good times, really good times. And we so enjoyed that. At 18, we were playing over in Rubidel, and there was a country and western nightclub over there. This was in the 50s. I think this was 1950. I think it was 1956 or 57. And my sister and I had a big, huge, billboard, and it said the Subtle Sisters. And down at the bottom, it said featuring Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash was starting out then. And he was a tall, skinny dude and was popping pills, a lot of pills at that time. And he was nothing but skin and bone. But when I tell people that, they go, "What?" But it's true. He wasn't well known yet, but I think it was 1956. Anyhow, but those were the good old days. I met my sister and I married brothers that we met at that country and western place. And my sister got married at 16 because she wanted to get out of the house because of the abuse, the sexual abuse from my father. And I was just 18 months from my sister. So I married the youngest brother. My sister married the oldest brother. And that was my one and only marriage. That was to Chuck Bros. And we went a little while without children. And then and we got married November the 20th, and that was 1959. It was when I was married. I was 18. Came my son that's 56 now, that's Ty. I named him Tyrone Colby Bros, and because at that time I loved Tyrone Power. He was such a good-looking man and one of my favorite actors. And so I named him after that. And I also wanted him to have a short nickname, and that was Ty. So he was born May 27th, 1962. Then Tish, her name is Letitia Dawn, and she came along 2 years later, and she was born March the 12th, 1964. And then Derek, he was an accident, but he ended up being an incredible accident. Anyhow, my ex-husband left me when my daughter was 3 months old. He was a womanizer at that time. Wasn't a good man. He is today. He is a much better man today, a lot nicer, and of course, he has to be. I mean, he just turned 80, and but he's back in Florida. He just lost his third wife um, from liver and kidney cancer, and I may have said that in another video, but anyhow, uh, so what had happened was I lived in Southern California all my life. I mean, for 50 some years, except for the 5 years that I took the kids to British Columbia, Canada. My sister had immigrated up there with her first husband, and then later my parents, went up, and I think they went up in 1970. I think it was 1973, if I'm not mistaken. Anyhow, they bought a big, huge log cabin home up there that was partly finished, and they finished it off. And those were good years. Those were good years, and I thought my father had changed, and but I realized, later on through a series that he had not changed. He's still a womanizer. He was still a pedophile, and I tell you, it was so hard to be around him, very hard. And my mother ended up getting cancer. Um, about I took care of her the last 10 and a half months of her life, and she had brain and lung cancer. She had quit smoking like 5 years before, but it was just too late. I mean, she just was not going to live, and they gave her chemo and radiation, and pumped her full of that. And of course, uh, the cure was worse than the disease, and that's when I became um, adamant that I was going to find a better way, natural way, because I've never taken drugs, I've never drank, I've never smoked, I don't even take prescription drugs. And at 77, even though I'm overweight, you know, most people don't think I look 77, or much less act like it, which I'm still trying to figure out what 77 is supposed to act like. but, but anyhow, um, but we had a pretty good life. And when I got married at 18, my ex-husband, he was the salesman for Wesson and Snowdrift and for Canada Dry, and he had part of his territory was Needles, California, Parker, Arizona, and Las Vegas. And then he sold Yellow Page advertising. We ended up going down to El Centro and San Diego every 3 to 6 months. We were traveling around. We were traveling around quite a bit, and when we were in El Centro, that was when Kennedy was shot. I will never forget it, because we were gonna have our celebrate our anniversary that weekend, and all we did was just lay across the bed, just crying our eyes out over the assassination of Kennedy. That was a very, very sad time, and it's one of those times where you remember exactly where you were, what you were doing, what you were thinking. Um, and my son was in a playpen, and all we could do is just, we didn't celebrate that weekend. We couldn't. It was just too sad of a time. But my husband, my husband finally left me when my daughter was 3 months old, and that's when his mother passed away, and he would have never left me had she still been alive, because she was bedridden with arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, from her neck down to her feet. And but very smart woman, very compassionate woman, wonderful, wonderful spirit of a woman. Never had a unkind word to say about anybody. And I was the daughter that she always wanted. She had 4 sons. The first one was in a car accident and was killed. And my ex-husband was her youngest son. And he said, I could have never left you because she would have killed me. He said it would have killed her. But she died at the young age of 52, and so did my mom, young age of 52. It's just amazing to me how, and it's funny how you think that they're so old at the time, and they were just super young. So it was a very, very difficult time. I had a very difficult time when my ex-husband left me. I was by myself. I had 2 babies, one 3 months, and Ty was a little over a year. It was hard. It was very, very hard. And I was still on my own. I went to work. I couldn't find. I finally went to work in a beer bar over in Colton, and I went to work over there. I went in to get a waitress job, and the guy says, "Well, what have you done?" And I said, "Well, all I've done is sing." And he says, "Well, this is a country and western nightclub." He says, "I want you to come back tonight with 3 songs." I said, "Well, but what about the waitress job?" He says, "No." He said, "Are you good?" And I said, "Yeah, I can sing good." He said, "Okay, just come back with 3 songs. I'll pay you $10. Well, $10 back then was, a lot of money. That was like $70 a week. I can't even tell you. I screamed, shouting hallelujah, walking out of that country and western nightclub. Well, there came a time that, and I was hired. When he heard me, he said, "You're hired." And one night there was 2 waitresses missing. I said, "Can I take the waitress job and sing on the side?" And he said, "Sure." So that's how I became a waitress. And I did that for a couple of years and ended up in beer bars and dancing and just doing barmaid. And of course, my mother said, "You're going to be a drug addict. You're going to be an alcoholic. You're, hanging around those people." I said, "Mom, it's the only job that I can get where I can make tips." Because I've always said, if you can make tips, let me tell you, get that job because you're never broke. And that's what I did when those kids were babies. And I don't know how I did it. I look back now and I tell you, God had to have had my back because I worked 2 and 3 jobs. I worked one job after another. I sold everything. You could do 3 pages of every single job that I held. I even passed out at one job because it was a brand new place, and it was called the Sophisticated Hop Bar in San Bernardino. And the only patrons that were hanging out there was the Hells Angels. And I ended up almost killing a man because of that time. I had a little short outfit on. I only weighed maybe, oh goodness, maybe I would say 95 pounds at the most. And I had this little short skirt on with pantyhose. And I tell you this, there was a table of 8 guys, all of them Hells Angels. And I was a feisty little thing. You just didn't mess with me. I was a lot stronger than what anybody thought. But this guy was putting his hands up my skirt. And I said, "Look, you don't touch me. You do not touch me." And I said, "And I can tell you, I'm not going to be nice the next time. So you better keep your hands off of me." Well, the next time rolled around, I took a couple of pitchers of beer over to their table, and he did it again. And I said, "In case you didn't hear me the first time, I'm going to tell you a second time. You touch me a third time, believe me, you're not going to even know what hit you." And third time it happened. And I remember picking up this pitcher of beer, full pitcher of beer. And you know, those pitchers were like super thick. And what I did was I hit him over the head. And I mean, I split his skull from here all the way down to the neck, blood everywhere. And Tiny, who was the guy who was our guard at the time, he stood at the door, and he used to be a Hell's Angel. And boy, he got me out of there real quick. Well, the guy almost died. He didn't die, but he almost. But I can tell you, I just didn't let anybody mess with me or mess with my kids or mess with my life because I was mother, father, and provider. My ex-husband just wasn't around. And if he did come, it was maybe once, twice a year. It wasn't very, very little, not much at all. And he, you know, I was getting bad checks. I could paper a wall with bad checks. It got to the point where I had to tell him, don't send me any more checks because they all bounce. And I said, it's costing me more money. And I wasn't making very many tips at all. And I can tell you that I ended up, somebody says to me, Palm Springs is really hopping. Boy, you can make tips there like crazy. And it was 68 miles from San Bernardino to Palm Springs. I went down there for a weekend. I got a job at Romanoff's, which later became Rimrocks. And I ended up there. Excuse me. I ended up in there in the late 90s. I worked through the early parts of the 70s. And I started massaging at some of the hotels, at some of the little places. I mean, I was massaging all over Palm Springs, the Riviera Hotel, the Spa Hotel, the International Hotel at that time. And it was, I was making good money. I mean, really good money. That's where I got my first $100 tip, waitressing at night, massaging during the day. And I got, it's amazing how you get one actor, and before you know it, you've got all of them. I mean, the word spread about my hands, which are tiny and little, but very, very strong. And excuse me, but I massaged. I was walking out my door, out the door in Palm Springs. I was working. I would go down Friday afternoon, work Friday from 3 o'clock till nighttime. Then I would work the restaurant, and same thing Saturday, same thing Sunday. And Sunday night, late, I'd be coming home. I'd get home like 2 o'clock in the morning. I can tell you that I put my money in my bra at the time. And my kids would say, Mom, you must have made a lot of money, because I would look like 40 double D. And I'm very small breasted. So it was funny. I made a lot of good tips. I was making, I mean, at that restaurant, I was making, anywhere from around 500 just Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, just in tips. And that's when the minimum wage was $1.42. So my whole wage for those 3 nights was $15, but I made it all in tips. And then, of course, massaging, I had so many actors and actresses. I mean, a lot of them. And I was getting a good reputation, about my gifted hands. And I can tell you, it was the Lord God that trained me, because I never had any training. And I created some techniques myself that I still do to this day, and ended up actually training my sister's staff up in British Columbia at the Hills, because her staff, she said, sis, none of them can massage, even come close to you. I want you to come up and train all of them. And I did. I think there was like 15 of them at one time that I helped train. And I had people coming in from all over the United States for my massages. They were flying in once every 2 weeks, every every month. And I even had the attorney for the Black Panthers out of Chicago would come in every single month because he was so stressed out. No wonder. So I had every star you could think of. And I jokingly said one week, well, I've got everybody but Sinatra and Presley. And I had both of them the very next week. And I don't normally say anything because when I've said something, people look at me and go, oh, yeah, sure. It's hard for people to believe, but it's the truth. It's the absolute truth. Uh, I could tell you stories after stories after stories of just those two, but of all of, and I'll probably make another video of that, just of, the things that, of course, there's some that I wouldn't dare tell, because some of those people are still alive, but the ones that have passed away, I can share, especially Burt Reynolds. There is a funny story about that, and I'll put that in another video at another time. But anyhow, but it was a very difficult time being mother, father, and provider. And Derek came along at a time, 1967, and when the doctor told me that I was pregnant with him, I tell you, like I said, I think I said this in another video, I cried for 2.5 months. I thought, how in the world am I going to take care of one more? I had so hard of a time trying to take care of my daughter Letitia, who everybody calls Tish, and Ty. But somehow, some way, we got through it. And of course, this was before I worked in Palm Springs. Palm Springs made everything much, much easier. But I gave it away as fast as I made it. I really did. Because I don't know, if somebody was hurting or needed something, it was, I think it was just me knowing how hard it was, to be in need. And so I gave everything easily, and never expected it back. I really didn't. And I had a lot of people take advantage of me, and we all have, every single one of us. And this guy who taught me how to do the pitching with the Ginsu knives and all of the slicers and dicers, his name was Jackie Z. He's passed away. But this man once said to me, don't give it if you can't afford to give it. He said, don't ever expect money back. He says, if you can give it and you can afford to give it and lose it, then give it. But if you can't, don't. And I remember that. And so I never asked for anything back. And I can't tell you, my kids would never remember a time that there wasn't somebody living with us. I was taking in stray people, not stray dogs and animals, but stray people. And I took care of everybody. I mean, for years and years and years. And, but I don't mind helping. I just wanted everybody to, I didn't want a hand out. I wanted a hand up, so that they could be self-sufficient. That was my hope and prayers for everybody that stayed with me or that I took in. And so I always had that compassion, which I totally feel came from the Lord. I was just born with it. In fact, all of my brothers and sisters are the same way, or my sister. We're all the same way, and my children are the same way. I'm so glad that they do that. Tish, this girl, she's constantly giving. So is Derek. All of us do. Because, we just always find people less fortunate than ourselves. And that's just love. That's just giving out love. And so it's really in each and every one of us. And I thank God that I've got wonderful, wonderful kids. But getting back to that time, 1984, like I said, I met this black kid, came to the door. This is after Derek and I got off the road selling Ginsu knives. And that was Cuba Gooding Jr. And he was 14 or 15. I can remember that thinking, this kid is so talented. And I said to him one day you're going to be bigger. And I think he was 15. As one day you're going to be bigger than Eddie Murphy. He goes, really? You think so? Well, one of the first movies he did, and Derek was managing him, was Coming to America. And Cuba knew all the lines, and Eddie Murphy got angry because he knew all the lines because he'd forgotten his, that he ended up with no lines, sitting in the chair where Eddie Murphy is cutting his hair. All because Cuba remembered everybody's lines, including Eddie's. And Eddie didn't like being shown up. So that was them starting out. And of course he was in commercials and Bugle. I mean, he was in jeans and Burger King. And in fact, I remember he was working at a Burger King one time, and we'd go in and he'd slip us hamburgers. Cuba would, outside of the kitchen. Those were some really, really good old days. And I think I told you that in another video that they were in the '84 Olympics, and Derek and my nephew Sean Suttles, they ended up teaching Cuba how to break dance, and they were all in the closing ceremonies. And when they heard that applause, they wanted to be in show business. Of course, they didn't realize, especially Derek didn't realize how rough and backstabbing and dirty that business is. When anybody comes to me and says, I want to be in that business, I said, no, you don't. No, you don't. And I try to talk them out of it. I really do. And but anyhow, it's a very hard, cold-hearted, backstabbing, dirty business, and I don't recommend it for anybody. Watching what Cuba had to go through, you couldn't get me in that business if you tried, not even a little bit, because it's hard to keep up, and you're only as good as your last movie. And of course, everybody gets their hands held out because people ask me today, well, why don't you ask Cuba for, why don't you ask him for help? And I go, no, because he's helped me a lot. I've got a car that's not running really good at the time, but boy, Cuba gave that to me, brand new. And it's a 2004 Jeep Cherokee. And Cuba's put a lot of money into it. He gave me the pink slip when I had my knees replaced in 2006 and 2007. And and I can tell you that he's been extremely good, very, very generous with me. And I have with him too. I worked for him for over 20 years, helped raise his kids. We had some incredible times, and I'll talk about those in another video of Derek and Cuba and some of the crazy things that they did. But he called me the other day, wishing me happy birthday. And of course, the boys that I raised and little Piper, I can't believe these boys are 24 and 22. And Spencer's the oldest. Mason, I talked to him, and he says he's in a good doctor episode, and he says, I think he said it was November the 16th. As well, make sure you let me know when it airs. And so he's got the acting bug, and Spencer, he's 24, and he's the assistant to a wealthy sports owner and a movie company, so he's assistant to them. And my little Piper, she just turned 13. And these are such good kids, really good kids. And I take pride in that because I helped an awful lot. And I tell you, that was probably some of the best times of my life was with those children. One of the best jobs I ever had. And I can't tell you how much I love those children. They're in my heart. I mean, they are like my grandkids. And I couldn't love them more. And Cuba will always be my son. At one time we were going for a job, and I said to the lady, I said, I've got 3 young men with me, and they need a job too. And it was selling advertising. And she looked at Cuba when Cuba walked in and real fast. You know, she looked at Cuba and he's black, and he said, "Oh, she had me at night." And of course, everybody cracked up because Cuba always had everybody cracking up. He's such a joy. He's in New York right now, and he's doing. He's Billy Flynn in the production of what is it? All of a sudden, Chicago. Chicago. My brain is blown a fuse. But anyhow, um, but Derek managed him for years up until he did Men of Honor, and Derek couldn't just couldn't deal with the dirtiness of that business, and that's when he went to work with Microsoft, and then later um, Paramount Studios. And then, of course, he was CEO of Kazaa. You know, he's the one that's responsible for your file sharing, you know, sharing music, sharing everything. He was a big part of YouTube and Google. I mean, he helped every single one of these companies, you know, build. And Derek was, you know, could have taken a lot of money, but he sold his stocks because he said, "Mom, I just knew that those billions of dollars was going to ruin me." And he said, "I just couldn't see myself doing that." And but getting back to my life, uh, I just, you know, I worked 2 and 3 jobs. I did what I had to do. Um, I didn't think about it. I just, you know, as a single parent, you just do what you have to do. And I was the Energizer Bunny. I was living on 3 hours sleep a night. If I was real lucky, I got 4 hours sleep at night. But I worked for Cuba for, like I said, over 20 years. And 4 years ago, I just couldn't do, you know, Southern California anymore. I had lived with some friends of mine. Uh, Rent is just so extremely expensive, and Cuba wanted me to live in Pacific Palisades, and I said, "Cuba, I can't afford to live there," because at that time the boys were off to college. Little Piper, her mom had her in gymnastics and soccer and dance, and so I was only babysitting maybe twice a week. And Cuba and Sarah, you know, were split up at that time. They were just separated, but not divorced yet. They are divorced now, but closer than they've ever been, and wonderful, wonderful parents. I couldn't ask for better uh, friends and people. I mean, they're just incredible, and I so appreciate. I mean, every single one of them. But and every once in a while, I go back and babysit my Piper. She even actually said to her mom, "Mom, you have to go away so Debo and I can have alone time together." And she's such a precious, precious child. But but I ended up moving here, and Cuba was angry. I'll pay $1,000 towards your rent. I said, "Cuba, they want 2,000 for a small room in somebody's house." I said, "I can't do this." I mean, nobody knows how expensive California has become. I mean, it's insane. You know, $4 or $5 for a gallon of gas. I mean, this is nuts. And the taxes, oh my gosh. I mean, it's just downright insane. People are selling their homes because they can't afford the property tax. Um, but I told him, I said, "Look, I'm not working enough. And I just can't even tell you. I have to move." So I mean, I was apprehensive of moving to Arizona, but it just seemed like the only option that I had. So my son Ty and we packed up, and we moved here 4 years ago. We stayed with my daughter for a year, and we ended up getting this small income apartment, which is just a mile from my daughter, here in Chino Valley. It's just right outside of Prescott, and they call it the Quad Cities or Tri Cities, and you know, it was around 250,000 people when I moved here, of those 3 cities. And now it's, I mean, I can't even tell you how fast this place has grown. But I love it. I love it here. People are so wonderful, so so very so very calm and warm and friendly. I can't even explain the difference. I mean, it's night and day. There's no smog here. We're 90 miles from Phoenix, and about the same amount from Flagstaff. So we're kind of right in between. We're 2 hours from the Grand Canyon, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful peaceful place. And I can't tell you how much I enjoy it. And Ty and I are in this little 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom apartment. Like I said, low income. They go by your, and I just live on Social Security, so which is not much, very, very, very little. But the Lord seems to take care of us, and so my son and I, even though he's 56, he's calmed down a lot, and so he's my living partner, and I love him to pieces. And Derek's just down the road, and him and Tish. So it's such a blessing for me to be able uh, to have all three of my kids around, and of course I've got three grandsons around, and they're wonderful. Oh my gosh, I am so blessed, so blessed. I can't even tell you how wonderful they all are, and I praise God every single second of every day for what I've got in kids. I mean, I look at other people that's just had so much trouble, and I really haven't. I mean, there for a while, my oldest son was an alcoholic, but he's long past that, and they're all just incredible, absolutely incredible. So we live on very very little. We are very simple minded people. You can't get any more simple than we are. Everything I have in this apartment is used, every single thing, and so we are truly blessed. But I've had quite a life. It would take me another, oh my gosh, probably another 5 hours to tell you my life story, which I don't think I'll go quite into that. But I was in California for 52 years, except for 5 years that I lived in Canada, and I've been 4 years here. So it's been good. God's been good. And of course, when we got Derek out of jail, out of prison rather, and I brought him here. Boy, I tell you, that was probably one of the happiest days of my life. And just to be near him, just to be near my kids, and to be blessed as we are, I have no complaints. I have no complaints. I'm not rich. My car is broke down. I need to get it fixed, and when we get the money, we'll get that done. But that's the only thing that's wrong. I mean, everything is absolutely as great as it can be, than it can be. I stam and stutter because I'm not following a script. I just speak from my heart. So forgive me for my coughing and my stammering, you know, because it's just me, just little old me. But I just want you to know that even 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 the comments that I've gotten, the phone calls that I've gotten, I can't even tell you how blessed I am, and the emails and just the wonderful texts. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. So if anybody needs prayer, like I said, anything in prayer, I'm a prayer warrior, and I tell you, I love helping. I love praying for people, and just listening to them. Sometimes you just have to have somebody that listens and understands, and especially if you've been sexually abused like I have. And I praise God. I was finally able to forgive my father. It took me a long time because I couldn't do it on my own. I kept praying to the Father, please, Lord God, help me. Help me to forgive him because I can't do it on my own. And I finally was able to do that. When he passed away, it was 2006. I sang the Lord's Prayer to him. I prayed with him, and I forgave him. Uh, it was a long time after that I really did truly forgive him. But like I said, it took a long, long time. And but I didn't go to his funeral. Cuba said he'd pay for the trip to Manitoba, Canada, which is where he passed away. And I said, nope, I'm just going to stay here and watch my babies. And he said, if you're sure. I said, I'm sure. My sister and my brothers went, but it was just something I couldn't do at the time. I did what I could. And, but today I honestly can say that I have forgiven him. And I've forgiven my ex-husband. I've forgiven everybody that's you know, that has betrayed me and abused me and mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, financially, in every way. I've forgiven everybody, and uh, and I just love them. Some of them I have to love from afar, you know, especially when it comes to some members of family. I love them and pray for them from afar, but I don't have a relationship with them because the last thing you want is anybody in your life that is toxic um, to your well being. You have to let that person go, even if they're in family. You have to let them go. Do not allow anybody to do that to you, because toxic relationships is of Satan, and that's something you cannot. It's of the enemy. You cannot deal with that. Separate yourself from him. And so, again, I'm going to. If there's any questions that you have, put them in the comments. I'll try to answer them. The next time that I make a video, and I'm happy to do so because my life is an open book. Unless it's the person is still alive and I don't feel free. I don't talk about Cuba a lot because I have to say that he's my heart, and there's just a lot of things that I would never ever talk about or betray him in any way, because he's been betrayed more times by friends and family, especially family, that I would never ever do that. Never. Not for all the money in the world. You couldn't pay me enough to turn my back on those that I love. And so that's just something that I do not do. So if it's personal questions about Cuba or any of the other stars that I knew, um, if they're still alive, I won't answer them. I just simply won't, and it just out of privacy for them. But anyhow, I thank you again for letting me ramble on, and I love you. I love each and every one of you, and just hope and pray that you're blessed, and that you just keep spouting off those blessings, because that's when the Lord God gives you more than you can even possibly realize. He's a loving and giving God, and I can tell you He's given to me and just keeps adding each and every single day. So I'm blessed beyond compare. So good night, and thank you so very much.